Greetings, fellow alchemists, and welcome to Wordplay Wizardry. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click that notification bell. If you enjoyed this video, or want to see me expand on something, leave a comment. Now, if you've been following along, watching these videos in order, you've heard me talk about hooking a reader into your story a few times now. So, let's talk about that. Because there's not just one place to hook a reader. In fact, there's several. One of the earliest is the selling blurb. Usually this is what you find on the back of the book, or if you're buying online, from the page where you buy. This is the first chance that you get to intrigue a reader. For most, if it's interesting, they'll go a little further. Maybe skim the content. It's not a big hook, but it does get them interested. So it needs to be strong. Then you have the opening. A strong opening will compel the reader to keep reading. This involves the first sentence and the first paragraph. Making these strong is also key, just like the blurb. But it too isn't a big hook. For that, let me rewind the clock a little bit. All the way back to 2006, 2007. At that time, I had a job with a film producer in Hollywood. Now, apart from managing the office and phone calls and all the typical Hollywood jobs, one of my duties was reading script submissions. And I had a mandate. If it's not interesting by the first 30 pages, then it's a no. If it is, keep reading, see if the rest is interesting. Funny side note. At the time, I was also a teacher's assistant and got into a little trouble with the university. Seems the students didn't like harsh criticism from someone in their age bracket or younger. I'm not sure what troubled them more, my age or my criticisms. But the problem with their argument was I was applying the mindset from my job. Bear in mind, this was a college course on pitching films, which meant they were going to face the exact same criticism once they actually started pitching. My goal was to show them exactly that, what was in store for them in the real world. But they didn't want to hear it from someone who just graduated, which again is ironic because a lot of people went on to get jobs with producers and studios after graduating. I'll concede to the argument that my critiques may have been a little harsher than standard. Truthfully, submission people almost never go into detail. In Hollywood and in publishing, it's just no. Thank you for your time, but we'll pass. And the argument that my mentor gave to me was to have higher standards to have a better chance at getting a yes. Because script and manuscript readers want to say no. In the old days, they were paid to say no. So if you set a higher standard for yourself, and for your work, it's much harder for them to do that. And look, I get no one wants to hear that their work is subpar. I don't like it, but I also welcome it, at least when someone can give examples. Why? Because it makes me better. Maybe something this time doesn't work. Well, now I know for next time. But I'm getting off track. Important points to remember, but not the point of the story. Do you remember what my mandate was as script reader? No, not the no. The first 30 pages. If a writer didn't get my attention by then, didn't matter if they had the best climax, the best characters, the best ending. The answer was always the same. No. If the presented draft didn't do something good in that time, no. 30 pages. That's all a screenplay gets. And while authors aren't writing scripts, the same rule applies. The only difference is, in literature, that number goes up to 50 pages. I call it the Hollywood give. I'll give you 30 or 50 pages to get my attention. If you don't grab it, pass. The first true hook of a story is this Hollywood give. Now, page count isn't really a thing anymore, but sometimes it's useful. Another marker is chapters. Some publishers will say 50 pages or the first 3 chapters, just in case that 50-page mark falls someplace else. This is the approximate length that you have in order to hook readers. If the story isn't compelling by the end of chapter 3, it's doubtful anyone will continue. So how do you do that? In fact, you already know. Strong characters, interesting atmosphere and mood, intriguing world and setting, and the story itself. Now, a good story goes a long way, but can't reach the finish line alone, which is where those other pieces come into play. I did say there were a few opportunities to hook readers. The Hollywood Give is the biggest. Painting pictures with words is another. The literary color palette. Pace is another. Getting the pace right in each moment ensures that readers get swept up in the tide. This is why I made separate videos on those subjects, because of the role that they play in keeping readers engrossed in your story. The reality is, a good tale has dozens of hooks, and each one plays a role. Maybe then a better metaphor would be whaling. In the old days, it took an average of 7 harpoons to kill a whale, just as it takes more than one hook to catch a reader. But don't see these as problems. See them as opportunities. Solid hooks early means the reader will stay around for longer. But it doesn't end with the Hollywood Give. Unlike whaling, which, as I said, needed 7 to 10 harpoons per whale, you have to constantly hook a reader. All that stuff we mentioned has to keep going. A changing atmosphere, a changing mood, different twists, different turns, problems that arise, complications. All of this needs to continue. Character growth, character introduction, setting. It's all important. On top of that, the storyline itself has to remain compelling. That means, switching metaphors, you've got a lot of weaving to do. Everything has to come together. Everything has to work together. Right atmosphere, right mood, correct pace for each scene, strong characters, strong villains, good setting, vibrant world, and an interesting and intriguing story. All of this coming together at just the right time in just the right way. Now, one thing you should know is I'm honest. Honest in my thoughts and critiques. Platitudes help no one, and ego doesn't count. The students that I taught thought my honesty was too brutal. Maybe they were right. Or maybe they just weren't used to someone telling them, bad job. But the reason that I bring this up is this. Will you always get it right? I don't always get it right. I try my best and hope people like what I create. At the same time, I'm open to notes. If somebody wants to tell me where my hooks failed, where I didn't capture them, I'm willing to listen, just as you should be. I listen, I learn, and I do better with the next book. Let me give you an example that might be bending the rules with the Star Runner books. Let's go to book 1, Journey Beyond. In that book, I spend part of the Hollywood Give on backstory. The first chapter opens on a wide expanse, gets into the backstory, and then a battle, with the narration going on as though we've lived in this world for several stories now. Then we back up and take a wider look at the world. It's a slight slowdown, sure, but there's more coming. More action is on the way. Now you may be saying, well, why is it spent so much on backstory? Why is all of that there? I thought we were supposed to be hooking the reader. And that's the goal. But as this is a new series, a new story, a new galaxy, I spend that time because I want to give people context. My feeling at the time was if I don't spend a little time on the world, then they'll be lost. So, as I said, in chapter 1, we get a little history and then jump into the action. Just enough history to get an idea. In chapter 2, we back up, we see the larger picture, and we introduce our protagonist, Simon. In chapter 3, the ambassador Ursay tells Simon about the current political landscape and about the war. Now, the reason why I said this might be bending the rules a little bit is because here is the end of the Hollywood Give. As I said, by the end of the Hollywood Give, you want people interested. And Journey Beyond ends with a discussion, ends with talking about political landscape. That right there isn't that interesting, but it is context. To me, it makes sense to have that conversation at that point, because in the very next chapter, Simon is going to take command of the ship, so he needs to know. He's been out of the loop on the war for a while, and by the end of 3, you have just about everything you need to know. And hopefully, you're ready to see what an artist, a painter, will do with a warship. At least, that's the idea. I'm hoping that by that point, you're wanting to see how that square peg will fit into the round hole. Because the world of an artist and the world of a war captain don't really mesh. Now, another option that I could have taken was to hold off on that conversation until later. Get to the ship, have the first meeting with the crew be awkward, and then have a conversation to understand why. I think both work, but I'm willing to listen if someone thinks otherwise. At the same time, I know that there's a lot of action coming, and we need to balance the pacing. So, all I can do is make a choice and hope that it's close enough to write. Hope that first section is enough to hook readers. But here's what I know about the Star Runner series. Space opera isn't for everyone. For those that do like the genre, I think it checks a lot of boxes. The language is approachable, but descriptive. The setting is expansive. The story is compelling. The mood and atmosphere shift as necessary. Outside of battle, the narrative speaks with reverence. It is a giant galaxy, after all. The characters are unique, flawed, and interesting. And there's aliens and spaceships and space battles and different planets and all that fun stuff. It's a war story, just set centuries in the future. And it sounds like it, the way a good space opera should. The pace also feels like that war story. Battles are chaotic. In between is calm. But there's an underlying threat looming that holds the tension. So it's never fully calm. There is one thing that I've neglected to mention, and it's a big one. This is something that, in its own way, should apply to you and your work. Oftentimes, whenever I'm reading, that's all that ends up happening. I just keep reading. I should be cutting. I should be editing. I should be looking for errors. I should be looking for the fact that I need to bring forward to the sequel book. But I get hooked, even if I have a goal. And that's what your story should do to you. Even though you wrote it, it should capture your attention. If it doesn't make you want to just keep reading, if you, the author, doesn't get lost in the world and the tale, you've done something wrong. Something is out of balance. Because if it can't hook you, what chance does it have of hooking a reader? And that's where we'll end it. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, fellow alchemists, take care.